to the Stand Organising Committee for putting it on, bringing us here tonight to, I feel, make us more aware of what's happening in the nuclear field at the moment, and in particular, of course, with Berkeley, which is closer to us than Wollaston, Bream and Blakeney are. And I think sometimes we forget in the forest quite how close we are to nuclear facilities. And of course, Oldbury, down the river, and as we all know, that's much closer to us than Chepstow is. So this is very important, it's on our doorstep, and tonight is to give us more information about what is actually going on.
Good evening everyone, and thank you very, very much for coming. We thought it'd be useful to give you a bit of background information about us and how SCAR started and what we've been doing over the past 40 years, just over 40 years. In the early 1980s we started. 1985 we organised a conference, the first national conference on the health effects of low-level radiation. It was held at Gloucester Cathedral, and we were at that time frequently contacted by the media, both local and national, for nuclear issues, particularly around the time of Chernobyl. Alongside that, we did run a big fundraising campaign because we needed to hire a barrister to present our case at the Hinkley Point public inquiry. We continued campaigning as SCAR until 2009, when it was announced that a large nuclear power station was going to be built on the Oldbury site. And basically that's when we became Stand, Severn Site Together Against Nuclear Development. The whole plan collapsed because of the economics of it, and Hitachi Horizon parted company. It was shortly after that, 2020, that the government announced that they would be introducing the 10-point green energy plan, which involved a number of large nuclear power stations across the country and a raft of smaller ones, the SMRs, small modular reactors, which were described in the public announcement of the plan as oven ready and off the shelf, words which we honestly never thought we would ever hear used to describe a nuclear reactor. So here we are again.
That would mean higher electricity bills for everyone and takes away money from developing renewable energy and storage. Extensive delays that mean nuclear power can never come in on time to help combat climate change. The vulnerability to cyber attack and terrorist attack. The risk of a serious accident requiring the evacuation of millions of people. And the intractable problem of disposing of the highly dangerous nuclear waste that will be left behind for many thousands of years. And there is another reason why this is particularly pertinent to us here today on the Severn estuary. Flooding. In 2005, NIREX, which was the government's own nuclear regulatory body at the time, published a report that said Oldbury and Berkeley sites were particularly vulnerable to flooding, and that withdrawal from the sites was inevitable. Now, since that report was published, as we all know, scientists now agree that the chance of severe weather events and the extent of rising sea levels is considerably greater than was believed back in 2005. We attended a Berkeley and Oldbury site stakeholders meeting last year, at which John Bullivant, who is the government's own Environment Agency coastal engineer, told us that the Oldbury nuclear site would have been completely inundated on February 2022 if Storm Eunice had taken its predicted course and coincided with the tidal surge. Luckily, the wind changed at the last moment, so the sea surge was not as huge as predicted. It would have meant personnel would have been unable to reach the site. To build a nuclear power station in such an area, which would have to be there for at least 100 years after it had finished producing electricity, because it would be so radioactive, would be sheer madness and a crime against future generations.
Wind power alone, never mind other renewables, in the UK now generates more than twice as much electricity every year than all the nuclear power stations in the UK do. Globally, wind power, again on its own, has now overtaken nuclear power in terms of annual production of electricity. And then, of course, the solar power, which is, again, increasing even more fastest, and together they're around twice as much electricity produced in the world today compared to nuclear power. Now, who'd have thought that back in 87? The other thing, of course, for daily balancing, wind and sun go up and down, you have batteries, and they are becoming incredibly cheap. The costs of batteries, it's the same for big batteries as well, going down and down and down and down. They'll provide a lot more competition with the gas-fired power stations. Now, we're supposed to be having a nuclear renaissance now for 20 years. 20 years they announced the nuke, didn't they?
Several times.
And it's still not happening. So when is it going to happen? Well, people have realised that trying another go at building these large nuclear power stations is no good. It takes 10, 15 years to complete them at massive costs and so on. And really, the size of this so-called small modular reactor that Rolls-Royce have produced lots of brochures about, is the sort of size of nuclear reactor they're building in the 1960s. That was the average size, 400 megawatts. It's back to the future, mate. But of course, why did they build them bigger than that? Why did they carry on building them bigger? Because of the economies of scale. It's absolute nonsense to say you build them smaller and somehow get the cost down. The opposite happens, the exact opposite happens. And you can tell your local residents that when they build the one plant that will ever, if anything, gets built on Severn side, I don't know about these pictures of 3 or 4 or whatever his plants. When the one plant gets built, there will be lorries and God knows what going up and down the roads for at least a decade. That's just to build them. It will be the great disaster on Severn side. Rolls-Royce have never they've never had anything to do with building a nuclear power station. They're not into large construction, famous for building reactors for nuclear submarines. And they're a lot smaller. You might ask, well, why don't they just take that and build that as a small modular reactor? And you know why? Because it'd be too damned expensive. They've got to build them bigger for economies of scale. So building them at 400 megawatts rather than, as EDF has been trying to do, at 1.6 gigawatts each, doesn't make any sense at all. I could go on about that. It's absolutely nonsense. And the only reason they're doing that, relabeling them that, is because it's a con job on the public, because the public is going to have to pay for it directly out of the taxes. The Treasury, direct Treasury subvention. There's not going to be anything remotely commercial about these, meeting contract terms or anything. It's just going to be a complete blank cheque. And so the only reason that SMRs have been dreamt up with is because they need to con the public that there's something new.
The challenge we face now is low carbon, energy security, affordability. And for the avoidance of doubt, for anybody who thinks that nuclear can put a tick in all of those 3 boxes, you really need to do your homework. And I have to admit, just a little bit disappointed to hear earlier this evening that members of the Green Party in this part of the world, a significant number of members of the Green Party, have come to the conclusion that nuclear is a really valid additional route to a low-carbon future in the way that we're now seeking to achieve for the UK, and everybody's seeking to achieve it all around the world. Honestly, I can't believe it when I hear Green Party members talk like that.
Not all of them.
No, but when I hear Green Party members talk like that, I kind of want to take them aside and spend about 2 hours with them, running through all of the arguments in detail as to why this is just an appalling idea. I know we're pretty keen to get to a low carbon future, a net zero, total zero future as fast as we can, but the idea that nuclear has a part to play in that is staggering. Because one of the ways in which we are yet again trespassing on the life chances of future generations is by bequeathing to them, or being prepared to bequeath to them, enormous amounts of nuclear waste, which we still do not know what we are going to do with. Meantime, all the nuclear waste has to stay where it is, in storage facilities, either at nuclear power stations or at Sellafield. Again, thinking of it from a young person's perspective, we heard recently that the costs of decommissioning those facilities at Sellafield that are no longer actively serving the nuclear industry has risen to £136 billion. 136 billion. And with that comes the advisory that of course is the lowest likely estimate for doing what we need to do with Sellafield. That runs through the lifetime of every person born today. They didn't benefit from a single kilowatt hour of the nuclear energy that has produced that waste, not one. But they will be paying the cost of it right through into the future. And if you're a little bit worried about what that sounds like, DESNZ, that's the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, in case you'd forgotten that delightful little acronym, recently published its outcome for 2024 to 2025, FY financial year 24 to 2025. Total amount of money spent in that financial year, 6.7 billion. It's not one of the big government departments. 6.7 billion, really relatively small in comparison to some of the big spending departments. I could play a little game with you here and ask you to guess, how much do you think of that 6.7 billion is devoted to the Nuclear Decommissioning Agency, the NDA, which is the body responsible now for dealing with all the nuclear waste generated from the last 80 years in this country. I'll get to the point. Roughly 3 billion. 3 billion. So every year, April the 6th, before any sensible work is done on future energy needs like affordable energy, energy efficiency, renewables, storage, grid upgrades, before you even start to think about that, on April the 6th, DESNZ's budget goes straight from 6.7 billion to 3.7 billion. And then, because we've got a bunch of absolute idiots making these decisions, the next biggest item is Sizewell C. Guess how much that one is? 1.7 billion. So you start with 6.7, you subtract 3 billion, you subtract 1.7 billion, that's 4.7 billion, At 6.7 billion, and you're left with £2 billion to do the rest, to do everything. It's utterly staggering. DESNZ should not be called DESNZ. It should actually be called DNP B&B, which stands for the Department of Nuclear Power and Bits and Bobs. Tragically, for us, let alone for future generations, the bits and the bobs include everything that really matters. Renewables, efficiency, storage, grid upgrades, affordability, addressing fuel poverty, everything are relegated to that secondary zone of bits and bobs. While this goddamn Dracula industry sucks the blood out of the body politic here across the whole of the UK, year after year after year.
A few short answers. One, subsidies. Nuclear industry is one of the wealthiest and most persuasive lobbying cartels in the world. EDF, the French state-owned company which is building a nuclear power station at Hinkley, has seen such enormous cost and time overruns, but were recently handed over £2 billion to start work on Sizewell C, which we've heard about on the Suffolk coast. So far, all they've done with it is chop down tens of thousands of trees on the Suffolk coast. But never mind, even if Sizewell C is abandoned, EDF have trousered £2 billion of the taxpayers' money, and sorry about the trees, they'll grow back. And then I heard a mention of atomic weapons. Well, first of all, there's our special relationship with America and the need for enriched plutonium for nuclear warheads. The UK has always provided the USA with weapons-grade material for their nuclear arsenal. And we also need such material for our own nuclear power station, for our own nuclear warheads. In the early 1950s, the Queen opened Calder Hall, and we were told it was to be a nuclear power station, a wonderful new way of producing electricity that was going to be too cheap to meter. Well, we now know that Calder Hall was not a nuclear power station at all. It was never meant to be. It was in fact a nuclear enrichment facility designed that we would have our own nuclear deterrent and needed the material for it, and also to supply the USA under a special agreement.
But there is one deeper issue, which is the coexistence of the nuclear weapons industry in this country and nuclear power. Now, it was an article of faith for the nuclear industry for 50 years that it denied any connection between atoms for peace and atoms for war. It was vital to sell to the British public that these two things were completely separate. For the last 6 years, here in the UK, ministers have started to acknowledge that the two things are completely codependent. And the reason why we're getting nuclear power now is in part to provide a subsidy to our massive new requirements for nuclear weapons. Billions and billions of pounds to upgrade our nuclear capability. Don't ever use the word independent, but it's still a capability. And that subsidy now is being drawn from the civilian side of nuclear power technology because the talent pool required for weapons and for energy shares the same pool of the nuclear engineers that are needed.
Well, again, this is another recycled idea from the 50s, has been tried and failed and abandoned for various reasons, because there's too much pollution, it produced whole bunches of radioactivity, and also there are economic basket cases. I mean, Doon Ray, of course, was abandoned quite a long time ago as a fast breeder reactors. And we're getting this reheated and proposed that this is something new. It isn't.
I hate it when people just mash up an old idea and say this is brand new. I mean, this has been around for literally 50 years. And in fact, I think at the last count, there are something like 9 fast breeder reactor prototypes that have been tried in different countries, none of which has worked, all of which cost a shed load of money. And the technology is almost unmanageable, that you'll be able to take our existing fuel, either highly enriched uranium or plutonium, put it in as the fuel for new reactors, and hey presto, you'll get energy out the end of it. If we're worried about how much small modular reactors are going to cost, fast breeder reactors are stratospherically more expensive and more complicated from a technical point of view.
One of the comments which was made by a politician about this was that basically it will cut out all this misinformation that the general public have, that these people who don't want it because they just don't like the look of it, they're misinformed, but also, you know, they're troublemakers, and this is what we've had all along the line, that somehow we aren't bright enough, we aren't informed enough, and to cap it all, we are troublemakers, and this is what you're up against the whole time. So certainly the public planning process will be engineered so that it will be less possible for people like us to say this is not a good idea. The American and British governments have come to an agreement, haven't they, with regard to some contracts that are, which will involve the building of nuclear SMRs, and in addition to that, there will be changes in the security, safety and security have been limited. Is that right, John?
It gets worse. Only this week, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in the United States revealed that President Trump has issued a series of executive orders requiring the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission to dramatically weaken its radiation protection standard. 3 of these highly regarded atomic scientists have written, quote, "If these federal radiation limits are gutted, the new standard could allow 4 out of 5 people exposed over a 70-year lifetime to develop a cancer they would otherwise get."
Jonathan, please.
Well, the only party that is clear about this, and come back to the Green Party story, is the Green Party, because it has not changed its official policy. I'm just flagging the dangers that in today's world of crazy misinformation and extraordinarily gullible people, brackets, Mark, close brackets, there is some danger that the Green Party position might be weakened. But right now, the Green Party is still totally opposed to nuclear power, and of course, the party that speaks most strongly about nuclear disarmament, because these two things have to be taken hand in hand. It's a long time since I checked up precisely how obscure the Lib Dem policy is at the moment. Last time I looked, so many words seemed to be put to so little effect that I could barely cope with it. I think that's the only guidance I can give you, really.
Our local MP regards nuclear development across the river as not a local issue. This is because he is not informed, so really we do need our local MP to hear from the people on this side of the river that the river may be a psychological barrier, but it is not a barrier to radiation. And it is not a barrier to anything else associated with nuclear power. So we really, really need the people in this constituency to start engaging with the local MP. He was invited here this evening, hasn't come.
Well, yes, because they're totally dependent on money from the taxpayer and also setting up laws and regulations to make the electricity consumer pay for it. So yes, they're not good. Nobody else is going to pay for them. Totally uncommercial as you can get.